Good Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast with Rob Lewis, Austin Price, and Jesse Simonton. Brent Hubbs, glad to have you along with us on this Tuesday as Tennessee gets ready for UAB. We'll talk much more about the Blazers throughout the week, but that is a UAB team that is 6-1 on the year, 3-1 in Conference USA play, averaging 29 points a game. They've been effective. They haven't played the greatest schedule, but certainly present some various challenges for Tennessee. But Tennessee internally, with their own set of challenges, coming off the 41-21 win over South Carolina, starting with the health of this football team and starting at quarterback. It seems like we've been talking about quarterback play and the quarterbacks all season long. Jeremy Pruitt now says he might play 3 quarterbacks on Saturday.
I joked about Spurrier in my column.
I know, and that everybody might be ready. What do you, if you're Jim Chaney and you're Jeremy Pruitt, how do you manage this week with your quarterbacks? If indeed Jared can take snaps, and if Brian Maurer is indeed going to be healthy and get work in at the end of the week, how do you manage putting a plan together and getting things ready? What do you do at the quarterback
If it's
position?
me, Garantano doesn't work except as your emergency guy. I know it's his non-throwing hand and everything, but still, you got to feel like if he takes a shot on it, it's going to be worse. He's going to have a screw in there. I know it'll probably be heavily wrapped, hard cast, all that, but it's not worth the risk, especially now that if Maurer is back, as Jeremy said today, and now that you know that Shroud's serviceable.
See, I feel like if they're going to play multiple, I think it's going to be JG plus Maurer. That's my opinion as we start this week, based on how they operated on Saturday, where it was clear that the reason that JG didn't start was because even though Jeremy had that fantastic answer last Wednesday about, I love our fans and they're not going to boo and whatever.
They're going to boo when South Carolina's defense takes the field.
It certainly seemed like the way that plan was, they started Shrout and had the Wildcat stuff early just to kind of slowly ease into the game, and then they wanted to put Jarrett in. And they were going to ride Jarrett, it looked like, until he got hurt. And so,
Well, what would you not? He played well.
100%.
He played really well.
But I just think I think that if they play 2, it'll be Jarrett and Maurer. And if Maurer's ready, and if not, then maybe it's just the Brian Maurer show.
It's interesting because we talked about JT Shrout and based on what everybody had said to us about him all season long, and some of the things that he had not done well on the practice field, including late last week before Tennessee played. He goes 7 of 11 for 122 yards and a touchdown. 55 of that coming on one play. I get all that, but he certainly exceeded what I thought he could do. How much more confidence do you think Jim Chaney has in JT Shrout managing a game based on what he got done and lining up and playing with him and playing winning football with him based on what you saw Saturday?
For the last 6 weeks, Harrison Bailey has been built up as the savior of Tennessee football because you felt like you had nothing in the quarterback room. But
now you got folks tweeting deepest quarterback room in the SEC.
Just the perception. I know, but the perception of that room though has drastically changed because, Maurer comes in, makes some plays, gives them a spark. He gets knocked out, and Shrout comes in, and everybody in the program's worried to death about it because he can't get them in and out of plays in practice, and he did some really good things, and some of that's Jim Chaney setting him up for things that he's really good at, throwing the deep ball. But a couple of times, Brent, he climbed the pocket and got short passes out to guys on the move, and he played much better than I thought he would play.
The smartest thing they did was how they eased him into the game, though, I thought. In terms of worrying about the procedural stuff and the operation stuff, how do you solve that? They rotated him early with Juwan. And so even though Jeremy joked about it on Monday about calling a play from the sideline and running in, and telling the quarterback what it's going to be like it was in high school football, that's essentially what Tennessee did on its first 2 drives. You look at that play-by-play, it would be Juwan for a play or 2, Shrout for a play. Juwan for a play or 2, Shrout for a play. And I think they allowed him to kind of get his feet wet a little bit, gain a little confidence. And then, again, as I had in my review piece, I think the game totally changed just in terms of an offensive identity standpoint on Saturday. On that drive, ironically, that they got stopped at the 1-yard line, they converted several 3rd and longs, and they realized we can pass block against these guys. They are not going to pressure our quarterback. And so Chaney was able to, even when JG got knocked out, continue calling deep shots. for a guy who clearly, has probably as good an arm talent as anyone on the team.
It's interesting, Rob, that what Jim Chaney's been able to kind of piece together here the last month, managing the 3 quarterbacks. It's almost like he got better when he had to manage different quarterbacks. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like his game plans were much tighter. That they didn't give quarterback as much freedom, put it more on himself and less on the 11 guys on the field out there.
It's almost like when you go to a restaurant that there's like 6 things on the menu, that they do them all really well, as opposed to the Cheesecake Factory where it's just a bunch of Cisco frozen items.
Yes, I'm so glad you agree with me on the Cheesecake Factory.
Yeah,
newfound respect for RM.
Yeah, it's like going. Maybe it's just a mom and pop, but they do 6 things they do them all really well. And I kind of think that's an analogy that fits Tennessee's offense, and I think it's also kind of what you wrote about in the 3-2-1 on Monday, that they're running the ball. They're not steamrolling people, but they're running it well enough to where defenses have to respect it. They have to play it. They can't ignore it, and that just opens up a lot of stuff in the passing game. That frankly, I don't. How much was Georgia worried about Tennessee running the football? I don't think a lot. I mean, by the second half against Georgia State, even how much were they worried about Tennessee running the football? So I think, really, just getting some more consistency on the ground, where teams they're not scared. They're not scared of Tennessee, but they got to respect them. I think that's really helped the quarterback play.
Jesse, do you think Chaney's limited? Do you think he's pared stuff down pretty significantly to kind of isolate what they can do offensively and make it easier for the players? Do you think I know they experimented a ton with Georgia in the Georgia State game. We've talked about that. They had too much stuff going in there. But do you think, as the season's gone on, it's him getting dialed into what he has? Is it him paring things down to where he's asking his players to execute less than what they were doing earlier? What do you make the adjustment to the Tennessee offense? Is it just offensive line play better?
I was going to say, to me, it all circles back to the fact that Will Friend's unit is playing as good a football in terms of the offensive line as we've seen around here since they had Kamara and Hurd were running behind that group that was pushing the pile with Dobbs. I mean, I just think that you look back at some of those pockets that they had to throw. I mean, Jarrett got killed on the one where Jameer didn't block anybody and they slid the protection, and he just messed up there. But other than that, I mean, these guys were able to just stand back there, whether Tennessee was in max protection, 5-man protections, and they just had time to throw it. And so I do think that gives an offensive coordinator confidence, where he had both man and zone beaters. J.C. Horn, former Tennessee commit, said after the game, they called some great calls against us, and they did, and you see it. I mean, South Carolina had no answer for when Tennessee went bunch in terms of running across the formations. And so I don't know how much has actually been pared down, because I think you could say with the Wildcat and some of the stuff they're doing in the running game, they've probably actually sprinkled in more elements than they had even against Georgia State. Maybe not as much motion and window dressing as they had then. But I think it all kind of just circles back to the fact that the offensive line's playing better. They lost Darnell Wright. Wande goes in and out. Jameer, they didn't really miss a beat. I mean, Marcus Tatum had a bad hold and had another couple plays that weren't great, but he was more than serviceable on Saturday against a good defensive line. Jameer played well outside of the one play that nearly got JG killed. I think it circles all back to that.
Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, look, Trey Smith, I mean, Kinlaw had 1 tackle in the game.
Go look at that draw. I mean, it's in my review. Go look at the draw play where Trey Smith just sits on him.
Yeah.
I mean, and that happened multiple times where he just pancaked a guy that's going to be a top 15, 20 NFL draft pick.
I mean, Trey Smith's making money every Saturday, in my opinion, with the way he's playing right now. I know there's going to be the medical questions, but suddenly NFL teams are much more interested in getting the answer to the medical questions because of how well Trey's playing, whereas a month ago it was like, yeah, he's got medical issues.
Again, the dude hadn't played in so long. I think it's taken him. It took him the first month to even get his feet underneath him. Get into playing shape. Because you can't practice. I mean, I think the last 4 games have been the rule more than the exception. I think the first 4 games were the exception, just being rusty.
Yeah, well, he's certainly getting better every week. I don't think there's any denying that, any question about that. Rob, I've mentioned this a couple of times, and Jesse and I talked about it heading to the car Saturday night as we left the stadium. How big of a deal is it that Jim Chaney's going against guys that he's got a book on, that he knows well. Now, they have a book on him, but I thought it was interesting. Will Muschamp said in his postgame on the deep ball to Callaway, well, we know he wanted to throw the over route or a different route there. We had that covered because we know that's what like Jim Chaney likes to do, and then it became a different route for a touchdown. I mean, how much is Tennessee benefiting from Chaney's knowledge of the
I think
league?
it helps, but I mean, you said it. I mean, it's not like Muschamp hasn't played against him before, or Bob Shoop hadn't played against him before. I mean, I guess it maybe who's better at their job, because I mean, I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't say Tennessee out-talented South Carolina. Now, they probably did on the perimeter with Juwan and Volquest, but certainly I wouldn't say that about in the trenches. I mean, I think that's the story of the game. And I know Jesse mentioned it. We talked about it in the press box, but that's what a $1.5 million offensive coordinator looks like out there. I mean, cobbling together something with one quarterback who was on the trash heap a week ago, one guy who – what did Schrock completed? 2 of 9 passes, 4 of 11 passes. Coming
into the game.
Then you throw for 351 yards and 3 touchdowns and score 41. I mean, they got 2 special teams touchdowns. That helped. But still, 41 points is 41 points, and it's the most they scored in 2 years.
Yeah.
I just go back to something that Jarrett said that we ended up ultimately it became a laughing quote, much like Pruitt's Titanic deal, when you lose to Georgia State and BYU. But to your point about the kind of the experience that Chaney has in this league, yeah, there's absolutely a book on Jim Chaney too, but he has answers. And unlike Tyson Helton,
Goes back to the Garantano quote about he's got
goes,
me answers.
JG talking about this summer, he's got answers, and that's kind of was the story on Saturday. Whatever Will threw out there, zone beaters, cover. Chaney had an answer for it, and Tennessee was able to kind of pick them apart, run the ball effectively just enough. They only had a long gain of 15, but they were able to kind of grind out some yardage. As Jeremy was kind of lamenting some penalties that I think stymied the drive or two. But otherwise, it was the offense, and then obviously the defense really got going and flying in the football there. And
offensively, I think we've all said something about this to one degree or another, but the inconsistent spotty play at quarterback has hamstrung you in the fact that you've not been able to take advantage of the best talent on your team, which is a couple of NFL caliber wide receivers, and they've been so bad at being able to get the ball to. You saw, Juwan made 2, NFL plays. The one where he ran over 3 guys on the way for a 48-yard touchdown. The Jared's last throw of the game for the touchdown. Callaway makes that incredible catch on the sideline, and Tennessee's just been so bad under center, they haven't been able to get those guys involved. And I think that's a big reflection of what happened Saturday was being able to get the ball to your 2 best offensive players.
How much money would you guys have, before we get to defense specifically, how much money would you guys have lost in a bet if you just said the greatest contributions at the tight end position this year are going to be their ability to block? With
I
Austin
bet the
Pope leading
under.
the way.
I bet the under before the season that
You bet the under on the number of catches. I give you that.
Yeah.
You didn't.
Not
you didn't
zero.
Flip it,
I didn't say
flip it around
zero.
and say Dominic Wood Anderson's going to become a really effective
That is-
blocker for
that
Tennessee.
is absolutely true.
I'll give you
absolutely
some
true.
love, but I'm not giving you all that love.
That is absolutely
Easy.
true. But everyone's saying the DWA was going to be this team's dynamo weapon. I did not see that. But both of those guys, and I gave them kudos in the review piece because on film it really popped out. Tennessee left them on an island multiple times, and they stoned defensive linemen or outside linebacker in terms of pass protection. The Pope's crackback block at the goal line, Jordan arguably probably should have gotten in there. They were effective on Saturday, and they both had a hold and whatever. But they were effective, and that was without a single reception.
It's those guys blocking, coupled with the fact the offensive line's just infinitely better. And I know one thing. If I was Jeremy Pruitt, I would be, whether Brandon Kennedy wanted to come back for a 6th year or not, I'd be filling out the paperwork trying to talk him into it, because the way he's been playing up front, coupled with the way Trey's playing, Wanye moving to right tackle and holding his own, how can you not be impressed with what Will Friend, and a lot of people will give Jim Chaney a lot of credit on that, but I think Will's done a really good job with that offensive line, and then flip it to the defensive side. What Tracy Rockers got out of the defensive lineman continues to impress me as well.
Well, they've created an identity on offense in the trenches. Okay, Jim Chaney, Will Friend, they've created an identity of physicality. Jerome Carvin, Maybe they should have found him week 1, week 2, arguably. That, there's no doubt about that. He brings a physical element to the right guard position that they were lacking. Okay, that was a position that was of detriment to Tennessee early in the year, regardless of who they put in there. Carvin has brought something to the table there. I am impressed with the fact that a freshman can flip sides in a game. He struggled his first 3 snaps at right tackle, bad. But then once he got his footwork down and sort of got it in his brain on how to function there, Wanye did a solid job there. I just go back to Pope, and I mean, just kind of where he was coming out of high school. Austin, you knew him out of high school. He thought he was going to be this receiver. It wasn't about blocking.
The next Jason Witten, that's what he said last week.
For his role to be on this team, to be basically the 6th lineman or the lead fullback or whatever, and to embrace it the way he has, kudos to Brian Niedermeyer and kudos to Austin Pope for buying into that being the system. That's the way you get on the
because
field.
When he was at Sevier County, he split out. When he was at CAK, he was split out. Even a year ago, the dude was laid up, couldn't lift his foot hardly.
He's still like the bionic man out there. He's got every band, tape, arm wrap, leg wrap.
He and J.J. Peterson lead the team and embrace it. But at least Pope's playing, right?
You calling him the Sean Livingston of Tennessee football.
There you go.
It's true though. I mean, like that back surgery did a world of good for him. And I mean, just a guy that he could not get through a practice last year at times, and he was very much bought in, did not miss any days in fall camp, has been, really, really good, and just a guy that's done everything. I keep waiting on Chaney to reward him with some type of play that kind of gets him out there on an island. Remember, was it last year or 2 years ago when he fumbled the ball?
Last year.
Yeah, okay. I expect something like that at some point this year.
Well, part of how well designed that Callaway play was, the first play out of the first half that didn't go for the touchdown with a big 48-yard play.
Where JG was late with the ball.
Yeah, the defense got sucked in on the tight end running a deep crosser. Now, it wasn't Pope, it was DWA, but that was, that was some of that eye candy where you have the defense flowing one way, but you got one-on-one against your best receiver against a safety who they picked on the whole night.
Yeah, they did. I thought South Carolina's secondary was slow. I can see why a lot of the reputation for them is they like to grab and hold, at the line of scrimmage when they're press coverage, because they have a hard time running with people. I think they're a little bit banged up back there too, but they had a hard time running with Tennessee.
And the ball's picked on our boy Jamie Robinson a little bit. Freshman.
Yeah.
He got his head turned around a couple times.
All right, let's flip it to Tennessee's defense. Jeremy Pruitt not happy. He was not happy at the half. He was not happy again on Monday talking about the first half. What's Tennessee got to do better defensively in the first half? It seems like their adjustments were good. Now, Alabama's not fair to say because they had Tua in the first half, and obviously they changed offensively, which made Tennessee's defense better in the second half. But Tennessee has been a little bit – obviously they gave up a 75-yard play on the first play of the game for a touchdown here, but they've given up some opening drives. Teams have moved the ball on them some in the first quarter. What do you think is going on with them that they need to tighten up in the first half?
I don't know the answer to that, but I was impressed with the way they were able to tighten up in the second half. I think that's a real. Cause it's a reversal of what we were seeing earlier in the year, where they were going into halftime. Other people were making adjustments to what they were seeing, and then Tennessee was getting bludgeoned in the second half. And I think that's a kind of a not been talked about a lot aspect of this team, but the way they responded in the second half. Against Mississippi State, but especially on Saturday, shutting out South Carolina, a team that's able to take those halftime adjustments, not just hear them, but then take them to the field and execute. I think that speaks to a lot of maturity. A lot of guys are used to the system, and they're doing it without two of their best defensive linemen didn't play with Bumpus. Middle gets ejected. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, as you think about it and kind of talk about it, I get that Jeremy Pruitt wasn't happy with the way his team played in the first half, but
one of them was an amazing catch, and the other one was the first play of the game, which they then corrected. And that was just a great design by McClendon and it's Carolina's offense. They run a bunch to the boundary side. They motion out there. Tennessee's linebackers and safeties get confused. You see a linebacker dart towards the guy in the backfield. McCullough bites on the play fake. And and that should have been a 30, 40-yard gain, and Nigel takes a bad angle, and so it's a 75-yard touchdown. Other than that, I thought, South Carolina had one good drive. Certainly the drive at the end of the half, that probably should have been a field goal attempt, but again, that was just an incredible catch by Brian Edwards. And so you look at it then, the defensive performance isn't as bad.
Isn't as bad as Jeremy wants to make it out.
Yeah,
fair.
and Feaster, that he had some decent trap runs in the first half where they were kind of doing the pulling linemen to the wide side. Tennessee adjusted to that in the second half. I did think South Carolina missed the speed that Rico Dowdle had. I mean, he gave Tennessee some problems a year ago, rushing, I think, for almost 150 yards. And so not having him back there was at least, countering, obviously, Tennessee getting Middleton ejected. And, that was a sore spot for South Carolina, not having one of their better playmakers.
Not 2 weeks in a row, because, but take Alabama out of the equation. And Tennessee was good. They weren't great, but they were good on the ground against the run in that game. But, they dominated Mississippi State. They dominated South Carolina. Held both those teams to under 3 yards per carry. That's just a level of play I didn't think that we'd see from this front seven.
I was surprised South Carolina, they tried to attack with the slants, but they didn't really try to do anything else play action-wise in the middle of the field, which I would, to try to get Tennessee's linebackers to suck up. I was surprised McClendon didn't attack that way. I thought that allowed Tennessee's linebackers to play in the middle of the field to play well. You look at Warriors' numbers, 10 tackles. Batuli had a career night with 15.
14 in the first half.
And then you look at what Henry did with 8 tackles and was much more sound. They didn't seem to try to pick on the middle of the field, other than the slants that Tennessee was playing a lot of man on. Man-to-man coverage on. They didn't do some other stuff in the middle of the field that we've seen some other teams do, didn't it?
No, and that did surprise me a little bit. Part of the reason I thought Tennessee was going to win this game is for as much as everyone was excited about Helinski at the beginning of the season and talking about Jake Bentley transferring and all this because Helinski threw for 350 yards against Charleston Southern or whoever, he's got some limitations. And he showed he was not accurate on Saturday, especially in the second half. Now, I'm not saying receivers were running wide open. They weren't. No, I gave a lot of kudos, and I think it doesn't show up in the box score because he didn't have a million tackles. But Sean Schamberger was fantastic at times.
As good as he's played in coverage.
He gave up a slant on that drive that they did score the Edwards touchdown at the end of the first half. But other than that, I think PFF had it. By my count, I think he gave up 2 catches. I think PFF said it was only 2 of 9 targets against him. That's good, and those are throws in the middle of the field. Some of those. But I'm not impressed with Helinski, and I think that there's some limitations there in what South Carolina is able to do.
And Schamberger came up and mixed it up, and
he had the big stop on that third down
which
run.
I thought was a great call,
defensive
call.
Little run blitz there.
He played very well.
Yeah, he certainly played better. And again, a little bit easier, not taking anything away from the defense, but South Carolina doesn't threaten you vertically down the field. That was a great catch by Edwards, but they just don't. Muschamp keeps talking about how they got to get more explosive offensively. They just don't have that in their arsenal, really, to be explosive.
And Tennessee's had those years where they didn't have guys that could
get
vertical. I think every team does it. Just kind of, you miss a recruiting cycle and don't have a guy develop, and all of a sudden you don't have anybody that can get that done. I just go back the front end, back end. Batuli and what Henry are getting done. Nigel's play. Tim Priest asked him, I thought was a pretty good question in the post game when basically he said you weren't very good, and all of a sudden you are. In a nice, polite way. Right. And Nigel kind of talking about finding his passion for the game again. Is it that simple? That you just kind of you either fall in love with it or find your purpose again?
Well, I think when you don't have success.
Which goes back to learning how to win.
Right. In your culture, when you don't have success and you have a turnover, I don't know how well he and Coach Kelly meshed, and there's been turnover in those positions. And look, he's in a contract year. It's the last year. Always, a lot of times seniors show up and play better in your last year. But he's playing with more confidence than he's ever played, which is allowing him to play faster.
This may be oversimplifying it, but I just don't think Bob Shoop was a good fit for him, the way Bob Shoop coaches. I think Bob Shoop's a good coach, but I think so technical, and I think the way Jeremy, the way Jeremy wears his heart on his sleeve, the way he connects with kids, I think that's really helped Nigel kind of unlock his potential.
He's playing well. I'm not saying he's going to line up on Sundays for anybody next year, but
He's got a
No,
chance.
but he's
Closing
putting
speed is
himself
showing
into a
up.
better position
Yeah,
for that.
he-
And I did think there's probably also some truth to the fact that he was able to kind of take enough lumps and make enough mistakes that with the people around him, he had some security in his position. He wasn't going to lose his job, and so I think maybe once he realized that, because that was part of the deal with Shoop, is that Shoop didn't have faith in him, and so he wasn't playing as much. So when he made a mistake, he came right off the field. And so in the last 2 years, it hadn't really been like that. And so then once you kind of maybe breathe a little bit and then take some of that coaching, and he's obviously getting fantastic. You know, I mean, Ansley and Pruitt are considered two of the best, better defensive back coaches in the country. You kind of add that combination. I think now we're kind of seeing some of that talent come to fruition.
Yeah, he's playing well. A lot of guys on this team playing well. The question is, can that continue?
The Bush Jones All-Stars, man, they're showing
Bush
out.
Jones orphans, come on.
Can that continue? Can they continue to grow the back half of the season and in the last month of the season? We'll talk more about that as we head into the game day on Saturday and head into the month of November. A lot of positives, a lot of things going well. Tennessee's got to get healthy. This is a tough stretch for them, and we'll see how healthy they can get, and that'll be determined as the week progresses. While everything is well on the field, Austin, you and Jesse have been talking about how Tennessee needs a win. They need wins to help them on the recruiting front. They get a win, they lose a commitment, and B.J. Olajar, which sounds like he was never really committed, but they had a good number of prospects in. We've got a date for Jay Hardy now when he's going to do something. Omari Thomas was in. What's the overriding takeaway from the weekend for Tennessee in recruiting?
Well, I told you Saturday night that it wasn't going to happen this week, but it was imminent on Jay Hardy.
Yeah, you did.
I just couldn't give the kid's date away.
He did it for you.
Yeah, I know.
He tweeted it out for
I
you.
know.
He took care of business. Go ahead.
Right on cue. Tennessee's, I thought, outside of BJ, and Jesse's right. I mean, when Eric Gilbert committed to LSU in a shocker in the middle of last week, it really sent shockwaves into the BJ's recruitment, because all of a sudden LSU became way more of a factor, and then
For a team that Tennessee beat out
yeah.
back in April.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was a recalibration there.
And they're also one of the hottest teams in the country on the field. I mean,
And he's much closer to Gilbert than he is Bailey.
Yes.
Yeah.
No
doubt about it. And so, but outside of that, I don't think Saturday could have went any better for Tennessee. When you talk about having Barron here, and Tyler's kind of been guarded, but even he's tweeting, after the game about kneeling rocking. You had obviously Jay's going to do something next Wednesday. Big O, to me, this is going to come down to Tennessee and Ole Miss. I think Tennessee will have done everything they can do.
And getting the family here was huge.
Getting the family, getting the sister who goes to Ole Miss, but she's going to be going into dental school here soon, so it's not like she's going to be necessarily at Ole Miss when he's there. I think, the way it all played out, you could not have went any better. Tyu Jones-Bell, I think Tennessee, if they can get him up here for an official visit that last weekend, they're going to have a real shot at him. I mean, they're kind of in a sneaky good spot right now. Now the question is, does he go to Alabama that first weekend in December and then they shut it down and he trips nowhere that last weekend, or does he make it back up here? If he makes it back up here, I think the Vols will have a real shot to,
Because Mama's not so sold on Alabama.
Yeah, make that happen. Here's the deal. The win Saturday, where did they struggle? I mean, they were able to throw the deep ball. They ran for 130 yards. They got hurries and sacks and then obviously special teams. So I mean, it's not. I mean, the whole team. If you're a defensive lineman, you felt good about it. If you're a receiver, you felt good about it. I mean, to me, it was a win-win-win across the board with what you got done in front of the kids, that were there Saturday.
And we go back to to circle this a little bit back to the team, you look at the Butch Jones orphans or whatever, a lot of these guys making plays are probably not going to be here next year. And so there is still, you're selling development and progress, but you're also can still pitch. We're going to have some opportunities.
To Jones-Bell, hey, look, the two guys who caught all the balls, the deep balls, they're not here.
Yeah.
That could be you.
Yeah.
Right? So you got a selling point that way.
And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. Now, obviously, Jeremy would not like to be as young as they might be next year, but that's just college football sometimes. So I do think that's kind of because you can't. We've talked about before. You can't just constantly sell hope if you don't show development or progress. Now they're kind of showing both of those things 2 of the last 3 weeks with Mississippi State and South Carolina, and even punching back at Alabama.
And the one guy I didn't just touch on, and I think he's a very interesting prospect, is Jimmy Holiday. Tennessee's telling him he'd get a shot at quarterback, and I'm sure he's going to be an early enrollee. He'd get the spring to prove he can play there. And if he don't, prove he can play there, then Tennessee would, likely move him to receiver, where a lot of schools think he's going to end up being. Even TCU telling him the same thing. The Mississippi schools tell him straight receiver, but I mean he's special with the ball in his hands, and I'm not claiming he's Juwan because I think he's a different type player. But the point is when you've played the quarterback position, guys that make that change, Julian Edelman. I mean, there's just an advantage to being a very smart player, and the kid's extremely smart from a football knowledge standpoint, and so Tennessee really likes Jimmy Holiday a lot. So I mean, like Holiday, Taiyu Jones-Bell, to go along with Jalen Hyatt and Jimmy Callaway. They're the 2 guys they got, Hyatt and Callaway, are guys that Tennessee desperately wants to hold on to. They don't have to worry about Hyatt; he's good, but obviously, Jimmy Callaway is somebody that. Kentucky's, calling. Georgia's at least expressed a little bit of interest, at least, to kick the tires a little bit and maybe rattle Tennessee's cage.
But again, Tennessee's throwing the ball vertical.
Yep.
They're explosive plays, things that receivers are all about and are intriguing to receivers. It's got to be certainly a help. So some momentum for Tennessee coming out of the recruiting weekend. Again, Jay Hardy to do something on November 6th. We'll see what they do this weekend in terms of visitors coming in. We'll have more on that at the end of the week. But when you had the atmosphere you had in the stands, the product you put out on the field, and the people that you had in town for Tennessee on what is their last biggest weekend of the season, recruiting-wise, because you're not going to bring a bunch of people in probably down the stretch.
Well, you're not going to bring anybody. I don't think anybody in. I mean, maybe the Kyrie Miller kid who was not able to make it in because of a health deal in the family. He might make it in this weekend or at Vanderbilt just for a game because he lives in Texas, so they'd like to have him come in for a game. But everybody else, they're going to try to bring in those first couple of weeks of December, which is smart because, I mean, you get a lot more time with the player and the prospect when it's not a game day weekend, and you don't have to be managing your team for several hours and then cramming it all into a small
I think
amount.
you also look at the board, and that if some of these guys drop the way we think they're gonna, pop the way we think they're gonna pop, suddenly Tennessee can be much more selective because there's only so many spots available, and obviously part of the reason now Taiyu Bell-Jones is a guy they've gone after for a while now, anyways. But you've seen kind of a pivot. Well, let's prioritize. We think we got a better shot with him than we do Rakeem Jarrett. So you start making those decisions, and then you can have those weekends, the couple weekends before signing day in December, where you bring in kind of those last hammer guys. To try to get where it's kind of all about them for those 48 hours. For
the final in-season big recruiting weekend, obviously it went very well for Tennessee on a variety of fronts. Speaking of going well for Tennessee, Rick Barnes just lines up top talent and just says, hey, come on in and check us out. 2 big-time prospects in for them over the weekend. Rob, continue to hear the same theme. Like his coaching style, like player development, like the chemistry on the basketball team.
And it's incredible to think about. And on the heels of what's arguably the best class in school history with Jaden Springer, number 14, Keon Johnson, number 18. They just had 2 kids on campus in the 2021 class that are ranked higher than either one of those guys. I mean, Paolo Banchero I'd have to go back and look, but I would say he's probably the highest rated, most talented basketball prospect Tennessee has ever hosted on an official visit. I mean, he's number 2 in that class right now. Could easily end up being ranked number 1. He'll be in the discussion for it over the next spring and summer. And then Kennedy Chandler, point guard, 5-star point guard from out of Memphis. That's one where Tennessee people hear, oh, Memphis, he's not going anywhere. I wouldn't count on that. I'm not saying he's coming to Tennessee. And there's a long way to go for both of these kids, don't get me wrong, but just in Kennedy Chandler's case, he is not a lot to Memphis at all. I mean, Memphis is going to be involved for sure, but he's open to moving, to looking elsewhere, and he's going to have every option in the country. I mean, Kentucky's been in to see him, Duke's been in to see him, North Carolina. I mean, he's going to be one of those kind of dudes. In Tennessee, it was one of the first ones in there. I mean, they went and saw him several times as a sophomore, offered him early, and getting him on campus right now, that was his first official visit. That was big. Now, I'm not suggesting Tennessee's going to get either one of those kids, but people that are following it know Bencaro has taken 4 official visits. The other 3 are to Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina. He's got one scheduled in January for Gonzaga. You're talking about 4 schools right there that have won national championships in the last decade. So they're up against it, but he loved what he heard. Rick pulled the Kevin Durant card out this weekend, talked about,
play the old Kevin Durant card.
Talked about how he used him, how he wouldn't, and what Paolo told me that he really liked was, like Coach Barnes told me, he wasn't going to put me on the low blocks and have me play with my back to the basket. He was going to get me the ball all over the court, let me make plays, and that resonated. So we'll see. I think Tennessee's going to be involved. I thought it was a long shot before this weekend. I'm not.
Now they got to punch a shot.
Yeah, I'm not saying Tennessee's got the team to beat by any means, but I think they're going to be in there. I think he and his family both really liked it. Now the thing you have to fight, in addition to all the other big time schools, is he's from Seattle. Mom and Dad both went to Washington. He is assuredly just a one and done player. If you really want to pick up and move across the country when you're only going to be somewhere 6 months, 7 months. And with Gonzaga, right there 2 hours away, also an option. So, that's going to be something to watch. But Tennessee made an impact this weekend. So, I think you'll see Tennessee stay involved with both of those guys.
Be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. But what a different place Tennessee's at in recruiting right now in basketball. It's just pretty phenomenal. Speaking of this basketball team, they're going to take the floor on Wednesday
night.
What do you expect? What do you look to see out of this team tomorrow night?
How they play. Rick will play a bunch of different lineups, but I just kind of want to see, what do they look like without. They're not going to be able to play through Grant Williams anymore. How offensively, kind of what's the thing? Defensively, with a smaller lineup, where I think you're going to be playing more, 6'6" type guys. You don't have the luxury of Kyle Alexander as a rim protector. Do you look to extend more? Do you look to pressure more? And what's a guard-oriented Rick offense look like?
And how healthy are they going to be?
Yeah, Josiah at practice last Friday. He has not been. They've been very careful with him. He didn't take part in the scrimmage against Davidson. Didn't get back on the court until last week. So essentially, he's been shut down for like 3 weeks. He's been working. He's not been, and it's not a tear or anything like that. But they've been very careful because they don't want a Lamonte Turner situation where the shoulder thing lingered last year. So he came back, and that's a big thing to watch. Devontae Gaines can be limited, broken thumb a few weeks ago. He's still got some kind of apparatus on his hand, but he's a guy that I think is going to be in the rotation. But getting Josiah back on the court is big.
Big. Curious to see what this team looks like. I think that there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of intrigue about this basketball team. You won't learn a lot Wednesday night, but you will get your first chance to take a look at some of these guys. And as Rob mentioned, try to figure out style of play, sort of what this team's going to evolve and look like as they head into the season, which will get cranked up in earnest here in a few weeks. But again, take it to the court, and first game action will take place on Wednesday night. We've got plenty of football coverage, plenty of basketball coverage, plenty of recruiting coverage for you, and plenty of discussion of it all at the General Quarters. That's going to do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast. For Jesse Simonton, Austin Price, and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.